This is the Marxists at the Movies podcast.
Scene opens, white lights dim down low. The cinema whispers where truths can grow. From shadows deep and screens ignite, the proletariat comes alive tonight. Marxists at the movies, bright and raw, breaking through the reels to rewrite the law. Workers of the world in every frame, changing the credits, rewriting the name.
All right, comrades, welcome back to Marxists at the Movies. Last time we got pretty deep into Spielberg, right?
We did. We went full on E.T.
Yeah, we were looking at E.T. through kind of a trans lens.
A trans allegory, right?
Yeah, exactly, a trans allegory. And I think we got some really interesting stuff out of that.
Yeah, I think it resonated with a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it was important to do because, like, you know, sometimes you gotta look beyond the surface and kind of like unearth the deeper meanings.
The subtext, the ideology.
Yeah, and today we're doing kind of the opposite.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going from, like, you know, a film that we could, you know, read as, like, you know, very progressive.
Right, full of empathy.
Yeah.
Crossing boundaries.
Yeah, and we're looking at something that maybe on the surface seems kind of innocent.
Yeah, fun for the whole family.
Yeah, but when you dig a little deeper, there's some stuff there.
Some problematic stuff.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly.
Yeah.
So today we're strapping on our theory goggles.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Che Guevara meets Roger Ebert.
I love it.
And we are going into the world of Harry Potter.
Oh, wow. Well,
Yeah. So we're going to be looking at these films through a Marxist and anti-fascist lens. And what we're going to try to do is, like, see how these films might actually reinforce eugenic and fascist ideologies.
Okay, so like full on deep dive into the dark side of Hogwarts.
Yeah, exactly. So to kind of guide us on this journey, we have a really fascinating article called Harry Potter Films, a Marxist anti-fascist reading.
Yeah, that one's really provocative.
It is. And it's really insightful. And it gives us a framework for how to look at these films in a new way.
Right, and we want to make sure we're, you know, really getting into the details of the films themselves, right?
Of course.
So we've got all the IMDb stuff.
Oh, yeah.
We've got Sorcerer's Stone, Chamber of Secrets, Prisoner of Azkaban, Goblet of Fire, Order of the Phoenix Half-Blood Prince, and both parts of Deathly Hallows.
We're not messing around.
No, we're going the whole way.
All right. And to kind of give us some background on some of these heavier topics like eugenics and fascism, we've got a Crash Course History Science episode on eugenics.
That was really good. It lays out the whole history of the eugenics movement.
Yeah, it does. And we also have a TED Ed video and a video from the YouTube channel Horses, both of which give us some crucial definitions and historical context for understanding fascism.
Yeah, because, you know, fascism, it's a word that gets thrown around a lot.
It does.
It's important to, you know, really understand what it means.
Yeah, and how it's manifested throughout history.
Exactly.
So we're not just, like, you know, waving our wands and making stuff up here.
No, this is serious theoretical work.
We're bringing the big guns. So our mission, if you choose to accept it,
I always choose to accept.
of course, is to really unpack this seemingly magical world of Harry Potter.
Right. Peel back those layers.
Yeah, and reveal, like, the underlying structure of, like, inherited privilege and authoritarianism.
Yeah, those really dangerous ideologies.
Yeah, and we're going to connect all of that to the very real and very disturbing history of eugenics and fascism.
Right, because these are not just like abstract ideas. They have real world consequences.
Absolutely.
So we're going to see how these themes play out in this, you know, story that so many people love.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to have these conversations because, like, you know, we can love something and still be critical of it.
Absolutely.
So let's start with, like, the foundation of the wizarding world, like the social structure.
Yeah.
This article makes a pretty bold claim. It says that the whole wizarding world operates like a caste system.
A caste system.
Yeah, and it's based on this idea of blood purity.
Yeah.
So can you kind of break down what that looks like in the films?
Okay, so like right off the bat, you see this really clear distinction between different types of magical lineage, right? Like you've got the purebloods at the top, like the Malfoys or the Lestranges.
You know, the purebloods, they've got that whole like aristocratic vibe.
Oh yeah, they're always like sneering down their noses at everyone.
Exactly. And like you can see it in the way they're portrayed, like Jason Isaacs as Lucius Malfoy.
Oh, he's so good.
He's perfect,
Right.
right? Like that sneer, that condescending tone.
Especially in Chamber of Secrets, like he just oozes this sense of entitlement.
Yeah, and those families, they have like a ton of influence in the ministry and in the wizarding community in general.
So it's like this hereditary elite.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got the half-bloods like Harry himself.
One magical parent, one non-magical parent.
Right, and they're like allowed in the wizarding world, but there's this sense that they're not quite as magical.
Yeah, they're kind of looked down upon.
Yeah, and you see that in like little ways throughout the films, like how other characters react to them.
Like there's always this suspicion.
Yeah.
Like they haven't quite earned their place.
And then even further down, you've got the Muggle-borns.
Born to non-magical parents.
Right, and they are like straight up second-class citizens.
Yeah, and the films really don't shy away from showing the prejudice they face.
Yeah, like Hermione.
Oh my God, poor Hermione.
Right. She's brilliant. She's brave, but she's constantly being put down because she's Muggle-born.
And like Draco Malfoy calling her mudblood, like that's just straight up hate speech.
It is. And it's like normalized in that world.
It's just accepted as part of the social order.
Which is messed up.
Yeah. And then we can't forget about the squibs.
The squibs.
Yeah, they're born into magical families, but they don't have any magic themselves.
Oh, right. Like Filch.
Yeah, Filch the caretaker.
He's always so bitter.
Right. And it's like you can kind of see why, like, he's surrounded by magic, but he can't participate in it.
Yeah, he's like totally excluded.
And the article points out how squibs are basically erased from wizarding society.
They're like the invisible underclass.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got this whole hierarchy based on blood, and it's all about like who's more magical, who's less magical.
And the article connects this to the history of eugenics.
Yeah, which is like a whole other can of worms.
It is so, like, what is eugenics exactly?
Well, like the Crash Course video explains, it's this idea that you can improve the human race by controlling who gets to reproduce.
So, like, breeding people like animals?
Basically, yeah. And it's all based on this idea of desirable and undesirable traits.
And in the wizarding world, magical ability is obviously the desirable trait.
Right. And anyone without magic is seen as inferior.
And so the obsession with purebloods and the prejudice against Muggle-borns.
It all stems from this eugenic ideology.
So it's not just like some innocent fantasy trope. It's rooted in a really dangerous and harmful worldview.
Exactly. And it's presented as normal in the wizarding world.
Which is like super messed up.
Yeah, it's basically saying that your worth as a person is determined by your bloodline.
That's scary.
And it's not that far off from some of the stuff that's happening in the real world, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like the whole idea of like genetic superiority and racial purity.
Yeah, that's some straight up Nazi stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's all connected. You
Yeah.
know? These ideas have a long and dangerous history.
And it's so easy to just like brush it off as fantasy.
But that's how these ideologies perpetuate themselves.
They sneak in under the radar.
Exactly.
So let's talk about another aspect of the wizarding world that seems kind of harmless at first, but actually has some pretty disturbing implications.
Okay, what's that?
The sorting hat.
The sorting hat. What's wrong with the sorting hat?
Well, on the surface, it's like this fun little tradition, right?
Yeah, you put on the hat and it tells you which house you belong to.
Exactly. But the article calls it authoritarian labeling of children for life based on inborn traits.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where they're going with that.
Right. So from a Marxist perspective, like, what's the problem with this talking hat deciding your destiny at 11 years old?
Well, for one thing, it takes away a child's agency.
Like, they have no say in the matter.
Exactly. The hat just decides for them. And that decision has huge consequences for their life at Hogwarts.
Like, it determines their social circle, their opportunities, even the prejudices they might face.
Yeah, and it's all based on these, like, supposedly inherent qualities that the hat can somehow sense.
Like bravery or ambition.
Which is, like, totally arbitrary, right?
Yeah, and it reinforces this idea that your path in life is predetermined.
That you're born into a certain role and you can't really change it.
Which is like the opposite of what Marxism is all about.
Right. Marxism is about recognizing the social forces that shape our lives and fighting to change them.
Exactly. So the sorting hat is basically like a microcosm of how class divisions work in society.
It's like saying you're born to a certain class and that's where you're going to stay.
And the article is especially critical of Slytherin.
Slytherin, the house of the villains.
Right. Like, all the houses have their stereotypes, but Slytherin is consistently depicted as the breeding ground for pureblood supremacists.
Yeah, all the worst wizards come from Slytherin.
And the article argues that instead of, like, trying to reform Slytherin or dismantle it, the wizarding world just kind of tolerates it.
Like they're hoping the bad seeds will just sort of, work it out.
Yeah, and that's messed up because it sends the message that these discriminatory ideologies are acceptable.
It's like saying, oh, well, some people are just born bad.
Which is like the exact opposite of what we should be teaching kids.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the big bad himself, Lord Voldemort.
He who must not be named.
The article doesn't see Voldemort as like some random evil dude.
Right.
It argues that he's like the logical conclusion of a system obsessed with bloodlines, power, and immortality.
So he's not just an anomaly. He's a product of the wizarding world itself.
Exactly. And that's a pretty damning indictment of wizarding society.
It is. But I think the article makes a really compelling case.
So how does Voldemort embody these like problematic aspects of the wizarding world?
Well, his whole ideology is based on blood purity. Right. He believes that wizards are inherently superior to muggles.
And he wants to create a world where only purebloods rule.
And he's willing to use any means necessary to achieve that goal, even violence.
And the article points out that the wizarding world, while obviously horrified by Voldemort's methods, they don't actually reject his core beliefs.
Yeah, they might not like his style, but they agree with his basic premise.
Which is that purebloods are better.
And that's really scary because it means that Voldemort's ideology isn't just some fringe belief.
It's deeply embedded in the culture.
And the films give us some really striking visual representations of this pureblood ideology.
Oh, yeah, like Voldemort himself.
Ralph Fiennes is so chilling in those later films.
He is right. Like, he just radiates this sense of disdain for anyone he considers beneath him.
And then there's Lucius Malfoy.
Jason Isaacs is perfect as Lucius.
He's so slimy and arrogant.
He totally embodies that pureblood elitism.
And Bellatrix Lestrange.
Oh my God, Helena Bonham Carter is terrifying.
She's like the ultimate fanatical follower.
Yeah, she's totally unhinged.
And they're all driven by this belief in blood purity.
So they're not just evil for the sake of being evil.
They're products of a system that tells them they're superior.
And that's what makes them so dangerous.
Because they believe they're doing the right thing.
So let's talk about Dumbledore.
Okay.
Now, the article has some pretty harsh words for Dumbledore.
Really? Dumbledore? Everyone loves Dumbledore.
I know, right? But the article argues that Dumbledore is not actually the hero everyone thinks he is.
What do you mean?
Well, the article says that Dumbledore, while he obviously opposes Voldemort, he doesn't actually challenge the fundamental inequalities of the wizarding world.
So he's not really fighting for justice?
Not really. He's more like a benevolent caretaker.
Like he wants to keep things running smoothly.
Yeah, but he's not interested in changing the system.
And the article points to some specific examples of Dumbledore's questionable actions.
Oh yeah, like his hiring practices?
Snape, a former Death Eater teaching defense against the dark arts.
Yeah, that's pretty messed up.
And then there's the way he uses Harry and his friends.
Like, he's constantly manipulating them into dangerous situations.
And he keeps secrets from them.
And he doesn't really give them a choice in the matter.
It's like he's grooming them to be soldiers in his war against Voldemort.
And the article argues that this is all because Dumbledore believes in the system.
He might not like the way Voldemort's running things,
Yeah.
but he doesn't want to change the fundamental structure.
So he's kind of like a liberal reformer.
Yeah, he wants to make things better within the existing framework.
But he's not interested in radical change.
And the article suggests that this kind of approach is ultimately ineffective.
Because it doesn't address the root causes of inequality.
It just puts a Band-Aid on the problem.
Exactly.
So now let's talk about the Ministry of Magic.
The government of the wizarding world.
And the article calls it bureaucracy and jackboots.
Which is a pretty apt description because the ministry is full of corruption and authoritarianism.
Yeah, and we see that throughout the films.
Like in the early films, Lucius Malfoy has a ton of influence in the ministry.
And he uses that influence to further his own agenda.
And then in Order of the Phoenix, Cornelius Fudge refuses to believe that Voldemort is back.
And he starts spreading propaganda and censoring anyone who disagrees with him.
And then Dolores Umbridge comes in and takes over Hogwarts.
And she's just awful.
She's the worst. She's like the embodiment of authoritarianism.
She implements all these ridiculous rules and punishments.
And she's constantly spying on the students.
It's like a police state.
And the article points out that a lot of the wizarding elite actually support these authoritarian measures at first.
Yeah, as long as it's not affecting them directly.
But once their own privileges are threatened, then they start to get upset.
which is like classic privileged behavior.
Yeah, they don't care about injustice until it affects them personally.
And the ministry's descent into authoritarianism shows how easily a seemingly democratic institution can be corrupted.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale for sure.
So the article also analyzes the language used by the Death Eaters.
Like words like blood and purifying.
And the article argues that this language is not just random villain talk.
It's actually coded terminology for fascist eugenics.
Which is like super disturbing.
It is. So how does this language connect to eugenics and fascism?
Well, like we talked about earlier, eugenics is all about controlling reproduction to create a supposedly superior race.
And fascism is a political ideology that's based on nationalism, authoritarianism, and the suppression of dissent.
And the Death Eaters use language that evokes both of those things.
Like when they talk about pure blood, they're echoing the eugenic belief in racial purity.
And when they talk about purifying the wizarding world, they're talking about eliminating anyone they consider undesirable.
Which is basically genocide.
Yeah, and it's all wrapped up in this rhetoric of wizarding supremacy.
So it's like a magical version of Nazi ideology.
Exactly. And the fact that they use this language so casually.
It shows how normalized these ideas are in their worldview.
And it's really scary to think that kids are being exposed to this kind of rhetoric.
Especially since the heroes don't really challenge it.
Yeah, that's one of the most disturbing aspects of the films.
Like Hermione is constantly facing prejudice because she's Muggle-born.
And Ron often shows his own biases.
And Harry, even though he was raised by Muggles, he still benefits from his pure-blood heritage.
So none of them actually question the underlying system of blood purity.
They just fight against the most extreme manifestation of it, which is Voldemort.
And that's not enough.
Because it leaves the system intact.
So the article also critiques J.K. Rowling herself.
Yeah, it suggests that her own ideology is reflected in the films.
Even though she's made some statements later on, trying to distance herself from these ideas.
Right. But the article argues that the films themselves glorify inherited power and social hierarchy.
And they present a worldview that's obsessed with who deserves to exist.
Which is a pretty disturbing message.
It is, and it's especially troubling given the huge popularity of these films.
Like millions of kids have grown up watching these movies.
And they're absorbing these ideas even if they're not consciously aware of it.
So what are some of the implicit lessons that the article says these films might be teaching kids?
Well, it says that the films teach kids that your worth is determined by your birth.
That society is naturally divided into rigid categories.
That authority figures should be obeyed.
And that the system is fundamentally sound.
Even if there are a few bad apples like Voldemort.
So basically it's saying that the films discourage critical thinking.
And they reinforce the status quo.
Which is not exactly a progressive message.
Not at all.
So let's delve a little deeper into the history of eugenics.
Go.
This Crash Course video and this TED Ed video give us some really important background on this whole concept of good breeding.
So can you give us like a quick rundown of what eugenics is and where it came from?
Yeah, so basically eugenics is this idea that you can improve the human race by controlling who gets to reproduce.
Like we were saying earlier.
Right. And it's all based on this idea of desirable and undesirable traits.
And this idea was popularized in the late 19th century by a guy named Francis Galton.
Who was actually Charles Darwin's cousin.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Galton was really influenced by Darwin's theory of evolution.
And by the whole social Darwinism movement.
Which was like this really messed up application of evolutionary theory to human societies.
So like the survival of the fittest, but applied to people.
Yeah, exactly. And that led to a lot of really dangerous ideas about racial hierarchy and social engineering.
And eugenics was like the practical application of those ideas. It was all about using science to create a supposedly better society.
But in reality, it was just a way to justify discrimination and oppression.
Absolutely. And the TED Ed video does a great job of showing how eugenics led to some truly horrific policies.
Like forced sterilization.
And discriminatory immigration laws.
And even genocide.
And these policies were often targeted at marginalized groups.
Like people of color, people with disabilities, and poor people.
And it's really scary to think that this was all happening in the name of science.
And that these ideas are still around today.
Yeah, they might not be as overt as they were in the past.
But they're still lurking beneath the surface.
And they could easily resurface if we're not careful.
So when we see this obsession with blood purity in Harry Potter,
it's impossible to ignore the echoes of this dark history.
Yeah, it's like a reminder that these ideas have real-world consequences.
And that we need to be vigilant about challenging them.
Absolutely.
Well, it seems like we've uncovered some pretty disturbing stuff in the wizarding world.
We have, and I think it's important to have these conversations.
Even if they make us uncomfortable.
Because we can't just ignore these issues.
And we need to be critical of the media we consume.
Even the stuff we love.
Spare the stuff we love.
So to our listeners, I'll leave you with this. Given how popular Harry Potter is, how influential it is, what responsibility do storytellers have to challenge these harmful ideologies?
That's a really good question.
Like, are they just reinforcing the status quo?
Or are they using their platform to promote a more just and equitable world?
It's something to think about.
For sure.
Well, comrades, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning everything.
And remember,
this has been Marxists.
Scene opens, white lights dim down low.
Thank you for listening to the Marxists at the Movies podcast.
Whispers where
Don't forget
truths
to
can
like and
grow.
comment.
From shadows deep and screens ignite, the proletariat comes alive tonight. Tonight, Marxists at the movies, bright and raw, breaking through the reels to rewrite the law. Workers of the world in every frame, changing the credits, rewriting the name. Popcorn power and the working class dream.